This war has been devastating on Ukrainians' children, not only in terms of the number of children displaced internally or rendered refugees, but also this terrible phenomenon of essentially taking into custody children who have guardians and loved ones who want them, transitioning them to Russian occupied territory or even deep into Russia itself, and potentially subjecting them to foster care or even adoption. We're also hearing about children being mistreated physically, being subjected to all kinds of political re-education, militarization, training with weapons. So children have been a huge casualty of this terrible war in Ukraine.
You will know, of course, that child soldiers is nothing new. We knew about them in Rwanda. We know about them being used in Syria and Yemen. This has a slight twist to it, doesn't it? In that children will be taken from one country to another and potentially indoctrinated to fight their own people.
That's right. This is a very clear violation of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which every country in the world has ratified, including Russia and Ukraine. Members of the civilian population cannot be taken and forced to fight on the other side. And that is a real concern when you think about the militarization of some of these young children. Obviously very impressionable, especially if they're taken at a very young age. It may be that they would have difficulty even remembering their family members when they're finally reunited with them. So this is a crisis. As we know, the International Criminal Court has already issued 2 arrest warrants for this very crime, the transfer of children from Ukraine to Russia, targeting not only President Putin himself, but his children's quote unquote rights commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova, for creating this system of abduction, forcible transfer and deportation, and then holding these children, even though they have loved ones who want them back.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. I was speaking earlier as well to a Ukrainian war crimes lawyer, gathering evidence and helping with the investigation from on the ground. I mean, to what end will all of this be? I mean, to a certain extent, will we ever see President Putin at the ICC being held accountable?
Obviously, that's the million-dollar question. Is as long as Putin stays within Russia, it will be very difficult to get custody over him without some sort of political transformation within Russia. But as it stands, this arrest warrant is highly significant. It expresses the international community's condemnation of what is happening here. The ICC received an unprecedented referral of over 40 states wanting the court to take on an investigation of what's happening in Russia. And the prosecutor of the ICC is working very closely with war crimes investigators and prosecutors within Ukraine in order to divvy up and share information about the various cases that might be brought for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other atrocities.
Yeah, and at the time, Peter Hofmansky pointed out that they've issued the arrest warrant for Maria Lvova-Belova and President Putin, but he said it was up to the global community to take them on. In effect, kind of saying, look, if Putin leaves Russia, he is potentially going to be arrested and taken for justice to The Hague.
That's right. They're both now essentially international fugitives from justice. And so any state that is a member of the ICC is under certain cooperation duties towards the court. So Putin should really think twice before he travels anywhere, not only to potential territory of member states of the court, but also anywhere that might have an extradition treaty with a member of the court. So he's essentially trapped now in Russia. We know that he's quite reckless with Russian forces, with Russian resources, et cetera, but he's not reckless with his own skin. And so I think even if there's a 10% chance that he might be taken into custody, he really will be thinking twice before he will travel anyway. So he's essentially trapped now within Russia, given the existence of this international arrest warrant against him.
And Ambassador Schaack, how concerned are you about all the other war crimes we're seeing unfold, civilians being killed virtually on a weekly basis now? It's residential buildings. We saw a shopping mall targeted. And of course, we've seen these children being unlawfully deported. How concerned are you by what you're seeing and hearing?
It's Staggering, the harm and the number of war crimes and other atrocities we're seeing. The prosecutor general within Ukraine is cataloging these and is now over 80,000 potentially prosecutable crimes. Obviously, it would be impossible to prosecute all of these, but the Ukrainian prosecutor general is working, as you mentioned in the introduction to this story. Already, charges have been brought, cases have been brought, sentences have been rendered. Some of these cases are done with respect to prisoners of war, individuals who are in the custody of Ukraine. Others are proceeding in absentia until they can achieve custody over those individuals. In addition, the courts within Europe are increasingly united and coordinated. A joint investigative team has been created amongst a number of courts in the region in order to be able to share information and strategies around bringing these charges when Russian perpetrators begin to travel, which we know that they will eventually do, as they have done from other conflict zones around the world. They eventually will travel, they will need to leave, or they will want to leave, and then they will be within the sights of the world's war crimes investigators.
And I want to go back now to our special report on the children being abducted and the young man that Dominic Waghorn, our correspondent, spoke to. Extraordinary trauma being inflicted on all Ukrainians, and the young Russian soldiers as well, who are being led to their deaths. But these young children, how do we help them in the future? What kind of trauma must they have been through?
Indeed, children are incredibly vulnerable in these types of situations. They need care and safety and security, and the situation of armed conflict has destroyed all of that. They're seeing their homes destroyed, their schools destroyed, friends disappeared, rendered displaced, rendered refugees. This will be a generational problem. All of these investigations are being conducted in a very careful, trauma-informed, and survivor-centric way. The United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom have formed the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group that is working very closely with the Prosecutor General in Ukraine to ensure that any investigation involving harmed children or otherwise traumatized individuals is done according to international best practices, so as to not re-traumatize these individuals, but also so that they can participate meaningfully in a justice process. Justice can often be a part of healing, but it must be done carefully because individuals being interviewed multiple times, et cetera, can often re-traumatize them. And so doing this work carefully, doing it well, interviewing individuals once, but also providing them with social services to help them work through the experience that they've happened. In your earlier story, the mother spoke about how her son couldn't speak about his experience. It was so awful for him. And so finding a safe space whereby he can explore the history, what he experienced, and come to terms with it and be able to work past it. We do know that there is something called post-traumatic growth, and that is what every single victim and survivor within Ukraine needs, a circumstance and a set of services and assistance to enable them to get past these terrible traumatic events in order to experience post-traumatic growth and to move on with their life projects.
And what hope is there of some of these children ever even being reunited with their families, if we're talking about 19,500 of a potential 300,000 being identified?
The United Nations has urged Russia to create a system whereby we can trace where these individuals have gone, these children have gone, and put in place mechanisms to enable reunification. And the international community and the United Nations and the Refugee High Commissioner stand ready to assist with that, assuming they can get Russia's consent and participation. Russia is the only entity that knows where these children have gone, where they may be now, and where they can be brought back home. It is terrible to think that parents have to go and take the perilous journey into Russia to try and identify their children and to bring them back themselves back through a war zone. So Russia needs to participate with the international community in order to reveal the identities of all of the children that they have taken, where they are currently, and what plans they have in order to reunite them to their families.
Ambassador Beth Van Schaack, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Good to have you with us and your insight.